Welcome to another episode of Farming in Ohio with Chris Bruynis. Today he's going to be looking at risk management through grain marketing. Welcome to another episode of Farming in Ohio with Chris Bruynis. Chris Bruynis is going to be tackling a subject that I think is very important to anyone that's wanting to do farming, regardless of the size of the farm. Chris, it's always a pleasure talking with you.
Pleasure to be here.
And I understand that, in the farming communities, there's a lot of risk that goes on in farm operations.
Oh yeah, there is, and one of the things that I think we really need to get a handle on is what is my financial capacity to handle risk. If I'm a new farmer starting out, that financial capacity is much less than if I've been at the game for a long time and I've got a lot of ground that's already paid for. And so, when we start thinking about when to sell grain, and that's a question that I get frequently is when should I sell my grain at what price? And first we need to know what is your ability to handle risk. And to me, I think let's take a baseball analogy. Do I hit a single or do I hold out and try to swing for the fences and get a home run? If I have a lot of risk that I don't have covered, I better take the safe single and make it on base and live to farm another year versus striking out trying to get a home run. And I've entitled this whole thing Risk Management via Grain Marketing because grain marketing is one of the ways that we can manage the risk on the farm. And let's just jump right into it. First off, we want to know what the attitude is of a person that's in farming. And, farming is a risky business. We've already said that. And are we a speculator? I see people like this all the time. Most of the time, they're not the most successful because they're trying for that highest price of the year. And nobody knows when that is or what that is. They're focusing on day-to-day price movements, and it's almost analysis paralysis. We're waiting on another piece of information to make a decision. This type of person will calculate the money lost by not selling at the highest price versus did I get a rate of return? I visited a farm one time, and this was back in the early 80s, and their goal was to get an 8% return on the investment in their farm. And, we think about the markets, especially this year, 8% return is pretty darn good. And they were able to do that 19 out of the previous 20 years. By knowing what their cost of production was and what the market needed to offer in order for them to make money. And so this individual, the speculator, also views prices separate from the business, and it's not. It has to be tied together. And then let's look at the other side. And this risk manager, they're like that farm I visited. Their goal is to make a profit, a good rate of return on their investment. They're focusing on their survival and growth of the business versus hitting that home run I spoke about earlier. And they're going to take their marketing, and it's an integral part of their business. They know what price covers costs, so that means they've done their budgets, and they know what price they need to make a profit. And then it's a long-term growth of the business. And so, here's an example. Last year, when we were sowing wheat, last fall of 2021, you could contract new crop wheat for July delivery for about 7.25. And I know some farmers that did that. They said, we're making money at 7.25. Well, as we went through the Russian-Ukraine conflict and wheat not coming out of Ukraine, wheat prices, we could have then sold them for almost $14 a bushel. So almost double. And so, if I'm a risk manager, I made money. Could I have made more? Sure. But what's interesting, I marketed some grain early, and then at harvest time, when I had more grain than I marketed, and we sold that at spot market, it brought the same, about 765. So it was very similar to the same cost. And so it's an attitude that I think we need to think about. This is kind of a busy slide, I guess, but when we start thinking about risk management, the very, very first thing we need to determine is the financial health of our business. How much risk can we afford to take? And we talked about that earlier, Patrick, in terms of if I have a lot of land that's already paid for, my equipment's paid for, I've got a healthy bank account, I can take a swing for the fence with a home run, and even if I miss, I'm still going to be able to farm another year. I may not like it, but I can take on more risk than if I'm a young farmer that's just starting out. I'm highly leveraged. I've got to pay the land rent to the farms I've rented, and I better take the first base hit and be safe about it. And then if we think about this whole risk cycle as we think about it, there's got to be a preference for risk. Everybody does. You know, a lot of people will go to the casinos or buy lottery tickets. They have a high love of risk, and there's other people that'll never do that, and because they have a low love of risk. And so I think that comes into we need to think about that. How do we manage our own preference for risk? What are our risk goals? We need to identify and prioritize what risks we're willing to take and which ones we aren't. And then probabilities come into effect. What's the probability of an event happening? We need to think about that. It's not a guarantee. It's not zero, but it's not 100%. And then what are our options? What actions do we take? We have to make a decision here. We're going to make an action. We're going to choose to sell grain on a given day at a given price. And then what flexibility do we have? We put a plan together that says we're going to sell 1/12 of our grain every month. What do we do if that price isn't enough to cover our costs? Do we postpone that sale? And so we need to think about what flexibility do we have. And then at the end of the year, we need to evaluate, did it work? Did we do what we were trying to do? And that all comes into these big bullets down the side. We need to be decisive. We need to manage our stress. I mean, if we have a low preference for risk, we might be stressed out over trying to make this decision. And then also our financial cash capacity.
Do you find, Chris, the age of the person really depends upon the amount of risk that they're taking? I know that when I was of younger years, I was more liberal with the risks than I would be today.
Now, when it comes to grain marketing, I see both sides. Typically, our younger farmers just starting out that don't have big bank accounts will be a little less risk takers. And then we'll get to a stage that, and I'm going to put these in our 50 and 60-year-olds that are well heeled. They'll take more risk. And then when they get a little bit older, maybe in their 70s, then they start to become more conservative again. And so it is a cycle, and it really depends on, when you're starting out, you're probably not as comfortable assuming that risk, but you make a couple decisions that work to your favor. You get a little more comfortable, and you're willing to assume more risk. And here's another chart that we use a lot of times when we talk about grain marketing, and it's kind of like, what is your opinion? Everybody has an opinion of what the market is going to do. And even if you're hiring a professional service, there's been research done that they're not right all the time either. Matter of fact, they're wrong as much as they're right. So it's just another opinion. That doesn't mean you shouldn't listen to their opinion, but then you need to determine on your own, do you believe it or don't you believe it? And then make a decision. I like this because it talks about what do you expect the future price to be of grain, whether it's going up or going down. And then the other thing is basis. And I've got the next slide to talk a little bit about what is basis. And so if we think the basis is going to strengthen or weaken, it tells us what kind of contracts we may want to get into. Um, whether it's just a cash sale or a forward contract, or whether we want to just hold the grain and wait to sell, or buy futures contract, and so there's all these tools available. And I don't want to get into the weeds today, other than there is a flow chart, if you will, to help us determine what tools to use when we think certain things are going to happen in the market. And that's all I'm going to say about that on this broadcast. But I do want to explain basis. And basically, the basis is the amount of difference or cents per bushel that we would be offered locally at a Cargill or at a ConAgra or local co-op. And it's a price they're offering compared to the Chicago Board of Trade price for that same time period. And usually that's the cost of transportation. If we back up far enough in history, all the prices were built at Chicago Board of Trade. And then the further you got away from Chicago, the wider the basis was, or the more the price would be less than the price in Chicago. And we always had the option years ago to deliver your grain to Chicago. And, let's say it took 30 cents to get it there. Then the local price would be 30 cents under. Not that all grain went to Chicago, but it was a way to organize the market, and it's not been a bad system here in this country. And so let's move away from risk and just start thinking about if I've got grain to sell. And we always talk about grain farmers being a price taker. They can't tell the market that, no, I want $2 more than what you're offering. The market will say, there's plenty of other people to buy grain from. Keep your grain. And so we basically have to take the price that's being offered. And so let's think about the 5 steps that I think we need to go through in order to market our grain. First, we need to know where we stand today, and I'll get into all of these a little bit deeper. Know where you're willing to be, and basically what risk you're willing to accept. Form an opinion about the market direction. I mean, nobody predicted the Ukrainian-Russian conflict. We knew there was threats, and we didn't think it would actually happen. And so, the market really hadn't bid that into the market until it happened, and then prices went up astronomically. And so we need to, what do we think is going to happen in the world? And there's lots of things that influence that. We need to have a marketing plan, and then we need to make a decision. So knowing where you stand today, not everybody's cost of production is exactly the same. Land prices are different across the state of Ohio. Input costs vary. Some people are high input users, basically are going to put on every insecticide, fungicide. Other people are low input, but they're willing to take a little less yield. And so again, what is your cost? There are budgets out there. A colleague of mine, Barry Ward, he puts together budgets, updates them a couple times a year. And so they're available. If somebody said, I want to know what it costs me to grow a bushel of corn, we can help determine that, or a bushel of soybeans, or a bushel of wheat. And so once we know what our cost per acre is, then we know what we can start selling at, because we know what returns a profit. And then the other thing that always comes up is, how much risk do you have yet? If I still have 50,000 bushels of old crop to sell, or I just have a little bit in the bottom of the bin to clear out, that's 2 different risk scenarios. And then how many bushels do I anticipate to grow this year? Again, we had a challenging spring in 2022, and farmers had to get out in the field and plant crops when conditions were not ideal. And so, we compacted a lot of dirt that would be limiting our yields. But because of all the rain we've had all summer long, that didn't appear. If you would have asked me what our potential for this year's corn crop and soybean crop was back 1st of June versus today, that number has gotten better simply because we've had the rain. Your financial position should influence marketing. Marketing advisory services, again, I talked about them earlier. They're not always right, but they may say, you know what, it's time to sell some grain. They have no idea what your cost of production is. And so only you know that. And so I don't think just following their advice without knowing your own information is smart. The balance sheet, and again, we should be creating these documents every year. That reveals how much risk the farm can afford to take when it comes to grain marketing. And then cash flow. I knew a farmer one time that whenever he needed cash, he hauled a load of corn to the market. Well, I'm not sure that that's strategic or smart marketing either. It created cash flow for him, but could he have sold it at a better time, invested that money, or there's opportunity cost there. And so again, we just need to make sure what we're doing there. And then moving on, where would we be willing to go today? My father, he's passed now, but he never, ever would sell anything before he had a growing crop in the field because I don't know what I'm going to have. I think that's helped today with crop insurance. And so even before I get it planted, we have preventative plant. So we have cash flow that could cover any marketing position today that didn't used to exist 30, 40 years ago. And so, but that's a question you have to ask. I personally have no problem selling crop when the seed is still in the bag. Sometimes in February, there's some market run up that you need to take advantage of. And then the second question is, are you self-insured? If I'm self-insured, I'm less likely to sell before I know what I have. If I do have crop insurance, I think it helps me spread that time frame out and when I can market grain. And then do you have storage ability? A lot of farmers today are building grain bins, not so much that I want to necessarily hold it, but more of a harvest aid. I mean, our yields are getting so much better than they were 20 years ago. Our elevators that we can haul to just can't handle the volume of grain that's coming out of the field at harvest time. And so having some storage as a harvest aid, we have a place to go with it so I can keep combining is one thing. But if I've got that grain bin, then how do I manage that? Because once I put it in the bin, do I sell it that day and price it? Do I just hang on to it? And I have to refer back to the earlier chart. What do you think the market's going to do and how much risk can you bear? And that'll drive those decisions. And again, when do we need cash flow? When is that combine payment due or when is that land payment due? And we need to make sure that we've got some cash flow coming in to cover that. But if we take a whole calendar year to think about, I can sell grain in February and the money comes in December, why shouldn't I do that? And so even now for tax management purposes, we can deliver grain in the fall that it doesn't come till January in terms of when the income comes in, and it helps me manage my taxes a little bit. And so we have all kinds of options out there, but it's what are you willing to do? What are you comfortable with? The next one was form an opinion about the market. Again, I'm not saying don't use a commodity advisory company, but again, just don't take what they say as gospel. They're guessing just as much as we're guessing. Yes, they're probably spending more time looking at what's happening in trade, what's happening in use than we have time to as a farmer. But again, what is the price? What do we expect the basis to do going forward? And what does history tell us? I've got the next slide that will give us a little bit on what that historical trend is. And then what is the futures price today and what do you expect it to do? And again, what does history tell us? Now, it's not always 100% correct, but here we've got a seasonal pattern of Ohio cash corn prices from the 1960s through the 19 teens or tens, if you will. And if we look at that, the lowest price historically every year, every decade has been at harvest time. And so if I don't have any grain priced and I'm planning on selling it out of the field at harvest, you're going to take a lower price than if you would have priced it a different time of the year. And so if we look at this, April, May, June, July, some years, we have a little bit better price. Now you say, well, there's not a huge swing here. This is plus or minus a nickel or a dime. So, we're talking about 15 cents top to bottom. But if I sell enough bushels times 15 cents, just take 100,000 bushels times 15 cents. If you do the math there, that's a significant amount of money. And if I can do that every year, that separates the farmers that are really successful versus those that struggle, is just thinking about this. And so we just need to keep in mind that selling off of the truck at harvest is usually the lowest price of the year for that grain. And so pricing it any other time during the year historically is better. Now there have been exceptions, and so don't think that it's always, but those exceptions, as long as we're pricing in a profit, it really doesn't matter. Yes, we could have made more money, and then you'd pay more taxes, but it really doesn't matter. And then customizing your market plan. What tools are you comfortable using? I showed that chart that had a whole different array of tools around it that we could use under different circumstances. But if I'm not comfortable using a hedge to arrive or buying a put or selling a call, if I'm not comfortable with that, then don't put those into your marketing plan. I think I had good advice from an attorney one time, and he said, if you can't explain how that contract works to your spouse, you probably shouldn't do it. And so, if these tools make you uncomfortable, then don't use them. Use the ones you're comfortable with, and then figure out how to use them effectively. And so we want to identify your sources of information. We want time commitment. To me, and I have a small farm, and I basically have 3 to 4 selling events a year for my grain. But I know other farmers that spend a lot of time on this, and it's interesting that if I'm making 50 decisions, 50 times I'm making contracts to sell grain, that's a lot of work, and that's a lot of time commitment. And research has shown that selling 5 versus 50 selling points have been as effective. And so we really aren't gaining much by selling 1/50th of our production over 50 different days or 50 different time periods. And then we also, when do you need to move the grain? If it needs to come off the farm to the elevator at harvest, I'll go back to that previous slide. It should already be priced because that historically is the lowest price. And if we can take advantage of a price during the growing season, that would be great. And so let's put this all together. We have all kinds of pieces here, but if we have a plan, and I recommend that the plan should be written, and we want to have concrete action steps. How much are we going to sell when? Are we comfortable selling it while it's still in the bag in terms of the seed is in the bag? That's pre-plant. Are we going to sell 20% of our production pre-plant? Pre-harvest, that's through the growing season. Typically, there is some weather market every year that pushes the price up 10 or 15 cents. That's been historical. Now that seems to be 30 or 40 cents. And so are we going to take advantage of that? What are we going to sell post-harvest? And again, how much room do we have to hold grain in a bin or in a structure? That would be for post-harvest sale. And then how is it structured? Again, are we going to look at this monthly? Are we going to look at weekly? We want you to be very explicit. And then are there conditions? Just because I said I'm going to sell 20% of my production pre-harvest or pre-plant, excuse me, if that's not offering me a profit, if I'm losing money on those sales, do I sell anyway? What are those conditions that I'm going to put in place that says, no, I'm not going to take that price? And then storage. At what point do I say, I'm just going to put it in the bin and see what the market does and come back to that later and sell it? Or do I say, I'm going to put it in the bin, I think it's going to go down, but I don't have time to deliver. And so then I'm going to put it in the bin and price it already for a future delivery date. What can I store? Again, I've seen a lot of bins being built around the countryside here in the last few years. And then is there a price target that I sell more or less? If people didn't take advantage of the Ukrainian-Russian conflict because of what the markets did when that started, there was a really, really great selling opportunity that's now weakened. And so, did we take advantage of selling more at that time because what the market was doing? And then the last one is decide and act. And this is the hardest part. We've got to make a decision. I made the term earlier, I mentioned the term earlier, analysis paralysis. Some people just need another piece of information before they can make a decision, and then they never make a decision. It can be emotional, it can be time consuming, but again, what does my market plan say? Am I making money? And then what am I going to do if this market is not going where I want it to?
It really comes down to what you said. Are you making money, or are you enjoying growing? If I can say it that way.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Some people love to farm and not worry about the income because of they have their bases covered elsewhere. But really, it comes down to, are you going to make money?
Am I treating this as a lifestyle or am I treating this as a business? And we need to be treating it as a business.
Hey, we're talking with Chris Bruynis. Chris Bruynis works with the Extension program at the Ohio State University, and he's located in Ross County. I've always known Chris to answer any questions if you give him a call or send an email to him. Chris, thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.